Hey, so Bruntz, and you're the perfect guy to ask, and I love the Caleb Clark text because it kind of sparked the thought the next morning. I was having these conversations in my own head about how cool is it to have options, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh shoot, Coach Boldy could go situational, he could go offense, defense, lefty, righty. He's got a ton of options. And then I was thinking, damn, he better be really good at communicating because you have to be pretty unselfish. And then
Yep.
it morphed into other sports, right? We've seen Coach Hoiberg shift lineups 3 consecutive games. We've seen all the talk about what do you do at the wide receiver spot, or how are you going to whittle down the defensive backs, and so I asked Robbie, I said, would you rather be a coach that has a ton of options, or would you like to see things a little more well defined? As it relates to this baseball team and they get started next weekend, would you rather have more defined roles, or are you willing with this early season slate, this tough schedule, to let it play out?
Oh, I think with college baseball and pitching, like I hesitate to say like this is what this guy is going to be in the third week of February because it always feels like by the time like you get to conference play, what you thought it was going to be is not at all what it is. And I think they've got. I would rather have options first off, and it's interesting. I think I talked to Will in November, like post fall and pitching depth, and we are discussing that. And he gave a lot of credit to Rob Childress because um, basically, you know, his what he told me then was you have guys that are not basically what they want their role to be is not probably going to line up with what's best for the team and where they're going to have the most success and individual success too. Like I think there's guys that I think would love to be starting pitchers that maybe are not built for that as it pertains to right now. So I think a lot of that work, and I'm sure it's probably the case for Fred and rotations and that kind of stuff, is you just have to build a culture of guys being unselfish. And I think that has always been one of Rob Childress's strengths is that he's been able to, within that pitching group, basically say this is what we need you to do, and also kind of explaining the why, because there's guys that, I mean, Jalen Worthley could for sure be a starter, but is that where he's going to help the team the most? Same with Drew Christo. I mean, I think both of those guys are going to be counted on a ton this year, but I don't know that it necessarily aligns with what their optimum role would be. You know, with you know what they would want to do versus kind of conflicting with what the team needs them to do.
Go ahead.
Bronze, if so, to start this deal, is you think for you is it sports specific about options, or whether they're answers or not, or are you just one of those guys that if you're communicating ahead of time, you always want choice, you always want an option?
Well, I think if you have open communication, I think you take the options. I mean,
Gotcha.
I think that's, you know, I think, and I think players now too are it's you have to explain the why. Like, why is a guy playing in this role versus not? You know, why is this happening? I think if you can communicate that, and I think also if you're communicating with guys, there's a trust factor there where, you know, guys will understand that you're kind of taking a non-emotional approach to things in some ways. So I don't know. I mean, I think it all kind of goes back to, you know, what if you have a good culture, I think you can kind of make changes like that, and guys are generally okay with it, even if they're not okay with it. You know, eventually they kind of come around to. I mean, you know, John Cook's story about Dave Buster
We used him with options. So
yeah, I mean that's another good example.
Bruntz, speaking of culture and kind of playing around with options, what is the kind of lineup changes and subsequent turning around of the season told you about the Fred culture the culture that Fred Hoiberg's been able to establish in Lincoln, something that seems like we weren't always totally sure about?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like, last year's team, I think, was a little bit, it felt stronger, I guess, the culture. And I don't know. I mean, I think this is kind of an interesting group because, you have a lot of success. You get punched in the face repeatedly for 6 games. You lose games that you shouldn't have lost, and you lose them in bad ways. And you kind of wonder how you kind of come out the other end of that. And I think that was a little bit of a test of kind of what you've got. And, I think it helps too when you have 2 guys like Gary and Williams who, I mean, they take up a lot of oxygen in the room. I mean, they're your guys. I think they've kind of stepped it up a little bit. I think you've seen more guys be a little bit more accepting of their roles and kind of what they are. And I think that's the challenge, I guess, and especially a sport like basketball, where it feels like most years, year to year, you're completely rebuilding your team. I think there's probably a little bit of a getting to know you period in some ways of like, how are these guys going to react together when, they're completely new. That, Nebraska is Nebraska, but I mean, they've only been here for less than a year. So I think basketball is a sport that's a little bit more challenging from that way. And I think there's also a little bit more of a tendency where if things start going badly, that guys kind of check out a little bit. I mean, I think that's kind of natural, but I think with Fred's team, I've been most impressed with, they've leaned on Gary and Williams, but I think there's been some more acceptance of kind of, guys being the 4th scoring option, or guys having to rebound a little bit more, and maybe guys not playing as much because they're a bad matchup. So whatever happened, before that Illinois game, something happened there to kind of, I think, force that change.
So, it's interesting. We were talking to Nicholas Allen the other day, and he said, guys, you know what? Sometimes I think we overthink this. And he gave us a couple of things. And this third one that he said was, your best players have to be your best players. No coincidence when you're talking about Gary and Bryce with Illinois and Oregon and now Washington. You could make the case that their best players were their best players. And I'll also add the other thing that we said, which was the super low-hanging fruit is, well, they got to shoot it better. And Asijan has answered the dinner bell the last couple of times out, and he's shooting it better. Maybe we just overthought this thing.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I mean, it's Bryce is definitely playing on another level right now, and that was, I mean, yeah, I mean, you needed to shoot it a little bit better, but I also think, like, you kind of need your best players to kind of drag you along sometimes, yeah. Like, and even you saw that last night, when things got a little hairy there in the first half, he elevated his game a ton in the second half. And I think what maybe is a step forward, and I mean, Washington's not a good team. I mean, let's just say that straight up, but there wasn't panic.
Right. And
the body language was better. Like, I know Fred said on his, post-game radio comments that, they kind of really lit him up in the locker room, and deservedly so. But, there were a lot of reasons why Nebraska could have probably packed it in that game. And, I think a veteran team knows, when you're down double digits at half, those first 4 minutes are so important, and they came out and played like it. So, I mean, maybe that's another kind of sign of maturity for this team that, even though bad things happen, you can still kind of dig your way out. And Bryce was a huge part of that.
Bruntz, it's interesting because you talk about panicking, and I always relate it to, and I said this in the opening segment, I'm like, yeah, they stayed patient. They didn't take bad shots. They kind of, what you just said, they stayed within the context. But conversely, on defense, they didn't foul. They didn't
No.
when they couldn't get a stop early and shots were going in. It's not like they scrambled in panic. They stayed the course. They still only had 11 fouls as a team, and Washington only shot 12 free throws. Like that's pretty good for a team that scored 47 points in the first half. But conversely, you see why they only scored 25 or whatever in the second half. Like they only went to the line 12 times.
It's kind of easy too. What I just said. It's also easy to say, point at Washington and be like, look, like they're going to revert to the mean. Like you're not going to come out and shoot like that for another 20 minutes, more than likely. So, stay in the fight. But I mean, they didn't foul. They played better defense. They didn't turn the ball over on offense. I think. I'm not going to take credit for this, but I think my colleague BC last night tweeted that they only had one turnover last night in the second half, and it was on the late shot clock violation.
Yep.
So, that's a pretty good recipe for winning on the road. And I don't know. I was curious that coming out of half how they were going to come out of the locker room, what the energy was going to look like, and it felt like Washington was a team that was pretty happy with the way things had gone in the first half, and wasn't ready for that wave in the second half for Nebraska.
We started this whole conversation with you, so we're going to end it with you on player development and who you would take, right? Remember, I tried to talk you into saying Dylan, and of course you kind of did, and then you said, no, you want to be your own guy. You're going to take Emmett. Were you Are
you going to tell me who to take?
No. I was.
He's going to say no, and then he's going to tell
I was a little concerned that what I was saying about Dylan would not land well with some people that would assume I was saying he wasn't a hard worker. I was like, well, hey, if one of your best players turns out to be this elite level fitness guy and they see him pay a price, and I went through this whole deal for a month. Were you surprised that Coach Rhule was so specific on making this what it's going to take to make this Dylan's team if he really wants it to be like that, considering, remember, this offense started last year with them saying, hey, we're going to turn it all over to him and see what happens?
Am I surprised? No, I don't. No, I don't.
I mean, that was pretty specific.
It was. I mean, he was asked specifically. I'm trying to think the way it was asked. He was asked specifically about Dylan, but it was
making it his offense.
I'm going to guess that was not the first time that he had said that. Like that felt like a postseason meeting type thing. Like if you go down a list with somebody of like, these are areas where, you might give a little attention. Like when he was saying that, I was thinking in my head, I was like, oh, I'm sure this has been discussed over in the offices.
Well, shoot, it could have just been the night before because he used the Supernovas game as an example.
Yeah.
Right? Like almost like it irked him, but not, right? It's like, okay, if you're going to be the locker room guy and then this guy and the throw T-shirts out guy and the Supernovas guy, you better be the first one. You know what I mean? Like it seemed very specific.
Yeah. No, it was. You're right. I mean, it's and I don't think he's wrong. Like I think what he said was correct. I mean, it's you don't necessarily get a pass as a freshman, but I think there's kind of a caveat of, you're figuring out where you kind of fit on the team and how loud you can be and what your voice can be. But I mean, it's you kind of, I think his point, and maybe I don't think I'm missing it, but is if you're going to get all of that stuff, I mean, you gotta be the guy that kind of leads everybody else too when it's time to work. So, yeah, I when he was saying it, I was like, that's pretty. That's not something that was just off the cuff. Was my take.
Yeah,
it good.
Felt like kind of just a not so gentle reminder to me, like, hey, if you like all the things that this life provides, you better still be good at this life.
Yeah,
I heard, and I'm telling you, first time around, and I'm gonna defer. I have this random partner that brought it back to my attention, that made it a good point. I missed it the first time, so when I went back and listened, I actually had my skirt and pom poms on. I was like, yeah, like With great power comes great responsibility, and if you can do this, this is next level. But deeper than that, Brunsey, I think it's because it's exactly how Coach Rhule is. He may come across as being like at the Waste Management or being at this event or this concert, but you best believe that dude is the first one in his office every morning.
Right. No,
Right.
I think that's true. And I think it's, I think it's, specifically with Dylan, I mean, it's there's a lot going into this year, and I mean, they've made no, when they compliment him for, knowing all the answers in the film room and everything else. I mean, if you're that far along and you're ahead of your peers in terms of your understanding and, what you are as a player, I mean, I think that's also kind of an open invitation to be pushed a little bit harder in other ways too. You know what I mean?
That's our guy, Michael Bruntz, Husker247. Bruntz, we appreciate the time as always. And I know it's the Chiefs, but I hope you enjoy the Super Bowl anyway this weekend. All right.
Hey, can you say? Yeah, I was gonna say. He's like, "Fly, Eagles, fly."
All right, we'll pepper you with some more Super Bowl trivia next time. All right.
I look forward to it. Thanks, guys.